Hi, it's Roz, and it's not a Tuesday, but I'm here with a tag because this is a coronavirus tag, which Steve started earlier this week. Steve Donoghue kindly tagged me, and I feel like I better do it before coronavirus becomes so unpleasant in that it's no longer okay to do like an affable booktube tag about it, just in case. Really long-winded prompts for this, so I'm going to have to try and read them, but they're really good prompts, which is why I want to do it. So prompt number 1 is misleading initial reporting. So that's a book that turns out to not be what you first thought it was, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, so my book that I've chosen for this is The Damned United by David Peace, and this is ostensibly a kind of like a fictionalised biography of a football manager called Brian Clough, who, if you know something about football, you will have heard of, but probably if you're on BookTube, a lot of you won't. So suffice to say, he was like a really well-known English Premier League, First Division as it was then, football manager. Except that it isn't really a fictionalised biography of Brian Clough. It is a descent into the deepest horrors of the human psyche, in the shape of a fictionalised biography of Brian Clough. If you've ever read any David Peace, you will know what I mean. It's great. I loved it. I love a lot of his books, but they are not for the faint-hearted. That's all I'll say. I'm not as keen on the ones he's writing now, set in Japan, but yeah, be interested in anyone else's opinion on those. Okay, prompt number 2, and again, I have to read it because it's long-winded. Okay, harsh containment measures. That's it. So, a book of one type that is impossible to hand to a reader of other types, and bonus points if you've tried. Okay, so I belong to a book group, and one thing that I've learned in this book group is that trying to get them to read the kind of some of the fiction that I really like is definitely a mistake. And there's an infamous book, okay, which is Michael Ondaatje's In the Skin of a Lion, which, in fact, it wasn't me that recommended to this group. It was another member of the group suggested this. We read it. I loved it. She loved it. Everybody else absolutely hated it. And this book has now become the byword in our group for the kind of thing that they're scared that I might try to get them to read. So when we're looking at choosing a book, you know, they'll say, oh no, it's not going to be like that Skin of a Lion thing again, is it? Because if so, we're not reading it. So obviously this is not one that you can get readers of other types to enjoy. I tried, that's all I can say. Prompt number 3, intense communicability. And that's a book that will work its magic on anyone. And my choice for that is The Little Prince by Antoine Saint-Exupéry, which is such a gorgeous book. I've never known anyone not love that book. You might think, oh, it's going to be kind of like irritatingly whimsical, but actually it's so thoughtful but kind of straightforward that, yeah, people of all ages, male, female, yeah, they all seem to fall for it. So that's that one. Prompt number 4, serious mortality rate. Now, fortunately, coronavirus, although it's a very significant mortality rate, its mortality rate is nothing like bubonic plague. And so my 2 choices for, my first choice for book with a serious mortality rate was going to be Nobber by Oisin Fagan, which came out last year, and is a book set in Ireland during the plague of 1348, which is like the Black Death, and the mortality rate is unbelievable. It's like virtually every character in the story dies. A bit grim, I suppose, and I'm not going to pick it because what happens in Nobber is you see how a pandemic can bring out the absolute worst in human nature, and so that would be far too miserable a choice, and we're not having that because we're being optimistic. So instead I've picked The Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks. Now that is set in another pandemic of plague, and which struck England in 1665-1666, and so this book is set in 1666. It's set in the village of Eyam in the Peak District in England, and it demonstrates the how nobly some people can behave in times of trouble and pandemic or epidemic, because the village of Eyam basically decided to quarantine themselves as a village. So the plague arrived in the village, and rather than flee the village and spread the plague, they elected to stay and to shut themselves off from the world. And the upshot of that is that, again, very high mortality rate, because plague has a very high mortality rate. Lots and lots of people in the village died, but they avoided spreading it in the way they might have done to surrounding villages. Now, what is really fascinating is that it's a novel, but it's based on a true story. The village of Eyam really exists, and if you visit the village of Eyam, and do if you can, lots of the houses are still there, the cottages that people lived in 1666, and they have like little kind of plaques outside with the names of the people who lived in that house who died in the plague, or who survived. It's beautiful, lovely thing. Yeah. So next prompt, quarantine prep. This is probably the most enjoyable prompt, because this is to pick 5 books or series that you're going to have ready in case you find yourself having to self-isolate and be stuck indoors, not able to leave the house for a couple of weeks. Now, me being kind of terribly worthy and earnest and well-intentioned, my first thought is, oh, right, this could be the chance to read, I don't know, Paradise Lost, say, by Milton, because, obviously just what you need is to read 10,000 lines of 17th century spiritually uplifting poetry. Then I thought, no, don't kid yourself, Ros. If you're stuck indoors with coronavirus going on or around you and hoping that you're not going to turn out to have it yourself, what you want is to be distracted. You want really engaging books that take your mind off things. And one natural choice would be to do a really nice reread, something you really love. So I thought Middlemarch, because it's possibly my favourite book of all time, but don't hold me to that. And it's satisfyingly chunky, so that would keep me going for a while. Then I think I should pick an author that I really enjoy, who's written kind of nice chunky books, one that I haven't yet read, because I only like to reread. So I thought maybe Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens, because I haven't read that, and it's definitely a chunkster. Then I realised that Steve had said that you can pick a series rather than a book, so it would be a waste not to. And another kind of surefire author for me is Trollope, Anthony Trollope. And so I'm debating. This is The Warden, which is the first in his Barchester Chronicles series, and I'm tempted to say that because I've only read the first couple and I'd really like to read the rest, and I just keep not quite getting around to it. I think I've read 3 out of them. But I could actually choose the Pallisers series, which I haven't read any of, and because I thought I shouldn't start that till I finished these, and that would just be a joy. I'd love to be shut up for a couple of weeks to read that. Then I thought I might, although everything I've picked is kind of quite good-humoured and cheering, but I might need seriously cheering up if I'm getting really miserable. And the one thing that I know will have me rolling around laughing and restore my kind of faith in the world and myself would be some PG Woodhouse. When in doubt, if in times of trouble, that's where I'd turn. And could have been, then you have to choose which series. Could it be the Blandings books? But no, it has to be the Inimitable Jeeves and all the Jeeves and Worcester books. So that's my series. Then, 2 series. Then I was thinking, what is the book that you absolutely have to read when you're kind of quarantining yourself from a pandemic? And I can't believe that Steve didn't suggest this one himself, because the obvious book is The Decameron by Boccaccio. Okay, so this pretext of this book is that it's 1348 and 10 young people, young kind of well-off young people, who live in Florence, have to leave the city to avoid the plague, which is raging in the city, and they go out into the country to avoid the plague and to entertain themselves. They agree that each of the 10 of them will tell one story every day for the 10 days that they're stuck there. And so it's 100 stories. Now, this was written in 1353, well, published in 1353. Boccaccio had lived through the plague in 1348. He was around then in Florence. He's a Florentine. And I just want to say, though, this is not worthy Ros picking something erudite. And no, the Decameron is an absolute scream. Okay, 100 stories, and they're everything from, there's like adventurous ones, there's funny ones, there's a lot of very bawdy tales in this. There's also some quite sad and moving ones, but it's a lot of it's kind of like naughty friars and sexy nuns, and it's medieval writer having a laugh and thinking, how do you distract yourself from the plague? So has to be this, and I would actually kind of recommend it, at least for dipping into. But you can enjoy it cover to cover as well. Yeah, it's a goodie. So that's my quarantine stack. Next prompt: repeat infection, and that is a book that was even more effective second time around. The whole repeat infection thing around coronavirus is a bit worrying, but just putting that on one side. Now, one thing I should say is that I'm not a great rereader of contemporary books. It's that whole too many books, not enough time thing. Look, I'm in my mid to late 50s. I've only got so many years of reading left. I can't be rereading things all the time. Having said that, I have just been reading Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies for Cromwellathon, and was really glad that I did, and I've really enjoyed those as a contemporary book to read twice. But the other thing that I do reread to some extent is classics, and the one author that I've reread, sort of done second time around or third time or fourth time or fifth time around most often, is Jane Austen. And I know that's a bit predictable, but I don't care. I honestly can say that every time I reread a Jane Austen book, I enjoy it even more than I did the time before, and the time before that, and the time before that. So Jane it is. Final prompt: effective prevention. Okay, and this is a bit of an odd one. So it's, what are some of the ways that you prevent bookish infection when you've read a couple of lousy books in a row and you want to turn it around? Now, my first answer to this prompt is, I never read more than one lousy book in a row, because, as I've said, too many books, not enough time. So I'm damn choosy about what I read, and the only time I read something that perhaps isn't my own choice is when it's a book group choice, but that's only once a month, so I get to read several other books in between, and usually they're good anyway. So it kind of doesn't arise that I read more 2 lousy books in a row, because I read reviews of people I trust, I ask recommendations. Anyway, just for the sake of argument, I'll assume that I've read 2 rotten books in a row and I need something good to cheer me up. And where I would turn for my kind of, well, palate cleanser, as you might call it, is detective fiction, crime fiction. And where better than to the British queens of crime? And so we're talking here Agatha Christie, Marjorie Allingham, Dorothy L. Sayers and Ngaio Marsh. And look, I've got a lovely Agatha Christie just to kind of whet your appetite. But all 4 of them I love. Early to mid 20th century British. They're the doyens of detective fiction, and the thing they do, okay, is you get the bit of dark, bit of puzzle, bit of humour, and the resolution. And they're the kind of crime books, all of them. They all write the kind of things where you know, in the end, the world is put to rights, or you know, the bad guy is caught, or the twist is resolved, and that's kind of, that kind of resolution is, I guess, what you need when the world is seeming a little bit strange and difficult. And on that thought, I'll stop.